Good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday evening webinar. This evening we'll be discussing power and protection, the new normal, with our special guest, Dato Ambiga Sreenevasan. We are living in tumultuous times, distracted by fears of our health for ourselves, our families, and economic well-being as well. And yet we are also living in a political and legal environment that is rapidly evolving. So Dato Ambiga is with us this evening to help us make sense of where Malaysia is now and how the shifts in power and protections are changing in Malaysia and where perhaps they should be shifting to in the future, where that will leave us in Malaysia. Let me first of all introduce our guest to you today. Dato Ambiga Sreenevasan practices as a senior counsel in a wide array of civil, commercial and corporate litigation matters. She's also a well-known human rights advocate and has received several international awards for her work in this field, such as the International Women of Courage Award from the US Secretary of State in 2009, the Knight of the Legion of Honor Award from the Government of France in 2011, the United Nations Malaysia Award for contribution to Sustainable Development Goals relating to human rights and governance in 2018, and just recently, the 4th Commonwealth Rule of Law Award, awarded by the Commonwealth Lawyers Association in conjunction with LexisNexis. She's a member of the Institutional Reform, or was a member of the Institutional Reforms Committee, which was set up to advise the government on reforms needed to key public institutions. Dato Ambiga has led several organizations in the past decade. She was president of the Malaysian Bar from 2007 to 2009, is a former chairperson and then co-chairperson of Bersih 2.0 from 2010 to 2013, and was president of the National Human Rights Society from 2014 to 2018. She's currently a commissioner of the International Commission of Jurists. Our special guest was made a member of the Honourable Society of Gray's Inn, barrister at law in 1980, and has been an advocate and solicitor of the High Court of Malaya since 1980. Let me introduce your interviewers and your hosts for this evening. Many of you know Mark Disney, studied English at St Edmunds Hall, Oxford, and has worked in publishing, journalism, as well as teaching. He's currently the deputy head of the sixth form at College Tuanku Jaffa, where he specialises on wider academic enrichment and has moderated many events for the Oxford Society and other venerable institutions like LSE. He is the past president of the Oxford and Cambridge Society in Malaysia, and he sits on our exco at the moment. I'm very happy to introduce Ang Shu Shen. She's just finished her first year at Newnham College, Cambridge, where she's studying history and politics. She's alumna of College Tuanku Jaffa and also Sri KDU International School, and is the 2018 winner of The Economist's A Minute to Change the World Open Future Video Contest. She's president of KUMAS, which is the Cambridge University Malaysia Society. And as a teacher, it is really wonderful to see Mr. Disney working with Sushen, his ex-pupil, to interview such an eminent guest. I think that's a really wonderful way to grow and develop. Very, very happy to see that. So I am delighted to hand over to Sushen and Mark Disney and to formally welcome Dato Ambiga to our talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, to begin with, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Dato Ambiga, for coming on to this live stream. I thought what we would do is start off by drawing on your experience as the former president of the Bar Council and talk about your perspective on the legal landscape in Malaysia. So my first question to you is this. What are the biggest differences you see in Malaysia's legal practice and system between now and when you started all the way back in 1982? Are things better, worse, or just different?
Well, where the legal profession is concerned, I think as a woman coming into the profession, obviously the numbers of women who were, doing court work and who were called to the bar were fewer than the number of men. But that very quickly changed. And I think today you will find that there are more women being called to the bar, if I'm not mistaken, than there are men. I mean, it was equal at very close to equal at some point, but now there are more women. But things, of course, have changed. And I think if you look at what's going on today, with what's happened with the MCO and the coronavirus and so on, the whole landscape will change. It is changing. We're looking to more virtual hearings. We do more meetings online. So, I mean, for the current situation, I would say that is the biggest difference. We are going into uncharted territory to some extent, but we're going to have to change the way that we practice. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I think obviously because we have larger numbers of lawyers, that's the single most important change. Obviously, some of the outdated practices have to change as well. But as at today, I think what I would say is going to really change the landscape is actually having to go virtual. I think that's going to change the landscape without a doubt.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Still continuing with sort of legal background. The second question is this: you've been involved with various women's groups. So, what do you see from a legal point of view is the main challenges still facing Malaysian women today?
Well, from a legal point of view, there shouldn't be any differences because, as you know, in the federal constitution, it was that was amended to provide for equality on the grounds of gender. So one would imagine that really should have led the way. But unfortunately, the practice, what happens in real life, doesn't really follow the legal, the legal provisions in the federal constitution. So for me, I think we still face the same, very similar challenges to what we faced before. And I think although there is more awareness of the necessity to empower women, and I think that is important, but we still have a long way to go to changing attitudes, to changing mindsets. So I think that is still a battle, well, it's not just in Malaysia, world over, that women have to continue to fight.
Right. So I guess in many senses, it's that women have sort of achieved formal equality, but there's still sort of a cultural disparity between how we view men and women from your point of view.
Yes.
Okay. And moving on to my third question, you're a very prominent person in the Malaysian political landscape, but you never sort of ventured into parliamentary politics. So was there ever a point you considered going into parliamentary politics rather than focusing on grassroots or NGOs?
Okay. I think my stand all along has been that, for a start, that I don't really have the stomach for politics in this country. And the more I see what's developing, I think I've made absolutely the right decision to stay out of it. But having said that, obviously you need you need people to serve. But I always thought, and I tell you, I have thought about it. I have had people come to me and say, look, will you run, And I have been invited, but I've always turned it down because I value the grassroots movements. I value civil society, and I always have felt that I can contribute a lot more being part of civil society as opposed to being in a political party, because in a political party, there are constraints. If you go in as an independent, that has its own challenges. But obviously, we need good people there, which is why, if you notice, Maria Chin Abdullah, who was also a leader of Bersih, she went from civil society, a pure civil society background, into politics. And I can tell you, she has got a lot of challenges, but it is good to have voices like hers in Parliament as well. But I'm afraid I'm very unlikely to actually change my mind on that. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not so comfortable in politics. I'm much more comfortable being in civil society.
So have never considered, will never consider.
Probably not. But, it's also probably because you need a lot of guts to go into politics, So perhaps it's that too, okay? That your whole life changes, as it were. But nevertheless, at this point in time, absolutely no intention of going into politics.
Okay, so let's move on to talk about your involvement in grassroots campaigns. For example, with Bersih, you were the Bersih chair in 2011, and there were unique set of circumstances that led to Bersih, and a lot was actually achieved. But a lot has also happened since then. A lot of change since Pakatan was in power. So, would you like to make a comment on the Bersih ideals, how it came about, how decisions were made, and what can we learn from them for future movements?
Well, when I came into Bersih, it was after when I stepped down as president of the Malaysian Bar, and we'd already had one Bersih rally, the first Bersih rally, which I wasn't a part of, and that was a movement of civil society and politicians. When I came in, it was with a view to make it an entirely civil society movement. So no politicians got involved in the running of the campaigns and in organizing the various rallies. And I suppose what I've learned is, and don't forget, it's a bit of I suppose, it wasn't easy because as a woman and so on and so forth, to actually capture the imagination of the people, we had to have a solid cause. Our cause had to be clear, had to be simple, and the people have to be ready. And I think, it's just like the BLM movement overseas, right, which has spilled over across the world. And what about the Occupy Wall Street movement? The moment has to be right. And I think people were absolutely ready for a movement like Bersih, which is why when we went to the streets, the support was overwhelming. And it was never about me. It was never about me, or it was never about the people running it. It was absolutely about the cause. So when it is the cause that takes center stage, everything else takes backstage, okay? So personalities, and I remember people used to attack me in Bersih 2, the government as well, and Bersih 3 and so on. But I always used to say, when people asked me, I used to say, look, it's never about me. I can disappear tomorrow. The movement will carry on. And it is that kind of movement that will survive. It is the kind of movement where the cause becomes much bigger than all the personalities involved. So that's what I've learned from Bersih. And by the way, I've also learned change takes a long, long time. We thought we brought it in 2018, okay? We did. And now we've moved backwards. But then again, maybe this is part of the whole process. Maybe there's a lot of lessons to be learned there too. Maybe it's a lesson that nothing changes overnight. It takes a while and it takes time.
I think I definitely agree with you on that note. I feel like cultural changes do take a lot of time, and it takes people to really realize the problems, and it really takes like you said before, like it needs to be complete total belief of many people in the cause. And I guess a lot of people would say that Bersih's greatest accomplishment was getting Pakatan Harapan in power during the 2018 elections. Since then, obviously, Pakatan has fallen out of power. And I guess I would like to ask you here, what are your biggest disappointments with Pakatan Harapan? In January this year, you said that they needed to listen to the people's calls for reform. So what do you think that they could have done but did not?
Oh yeah, I think I have a lot of friends in Pakatan Harapan, and there are very, very good people there. It's not just because of Bersih, but it's about awareness of the people it's the people who put them in power, okay? The people who came out in droves on May 9th to vote. And I recall the night before, it was like the roads were chock-a-block with cars of people going home to vote. So for me, the people put Pakatan Harapan in power. I mean, that when I say people, I mean all those who also worked. They didn't just vote, they worked. They were pacha agents. There were people bringing votes back from overseas. The kind of things people did, the measures they took to make sure their votes counted was unbelievable and unprecedented. Which is why I'm annoyed with Pakatan Harapan, let me tell you, because they were given a wonderful gift by the people, and we believed in them. But to be fair, they had a tough task. I know they have a tough task because they had to unravel 60 years worth of whatever mess that they found in there, right? They had to fix things quickly. But my quarrel with them has been and will always be that they were not quick enough on the reform agenda. Now, I was on the Institutional Reform Committee, and we rushed over a 2-month period, working to get our Reform Committee report out. Till today, that report has not been disclosed, despite our calls for it to be disclosed. And they didn't do, I mean, if I can just pick up 3 or 4 key things that they really could have done, but dragged their feet and didn't do. One is the Sedition Act, the repeal of the Sedition Act. Number 2, the abolishment of the death penalty. That ought to have been done. I don't know what the difficulty was with that. And then you have so many other, things which militated against democracy, like the MCMC Act, the various sections there, things that curtailed freedom of speech. Many things and things like statelessness, problems about statelessness could have been resolved. Deaths in custody, getting the IPCMC, all right, the Police Misconduct Commission, up and running. But they failed. That's where they failed us, I think, because that could have been done. Because right now, my feeling is it's never going to be done. These things were right there for the taking. And now I feel with this new government, it's not going to be done. And that they have to take responsibility for. PH has to take responsibility for that. Because we kept telling them, if you don't do changes in your first 2 years, first 1.5 years, it's not going to happen. Because people get complacent, and that was what was happening. And they kept kicking the can down the road. If you remember, death penalty came up once, they kicked it down the road. IPCMC came up once, they kicked it down the road. Sedition Act, they talked about that. So the only legislation that they repealed was the Fake News Act. Okay? And of course, to be fair, credit to them, they brought in the 18-year-olds to vote. That was a good thing that they did, a constitutional amendment. But there were so many other things that could have been done. So that's my biggest quarrel with them, honestly. And I think there was too much infighting. They wasted too much time on infighting rather than concentrating on what the people mandated them to do.
Okay. I definitely share your frustration, all of what you said in disappointment. I worked with Amnesty International Malaysia, so they were also very fixated on the death penalty, and it was very disappointing when it didn't go through the way we wanted it to. Yeah, there definitely seems to be sort of a sense of hopelessness, and sort of just like there isn't any hope left for Malaysia left. And personally speaking, as a student, a lot of my friends who are in their final years at university are so conflicted about whether they should come home or not, because they feel as though even if they do, they can't make a difference anyway. So I guess, what would you say to all these young people who are sort of on the fence of what to do? Do they have a place in Malaysia? Can they make an impact in Malaysia? What's your take on it?
Well, for starters, I completely understand why they feel that way. There are many people who came home, took up jobs, they gave up jobs overseas, took up jobs in Malaysia, and suddenly when there's a change in government, they get terminated, their services get terminated. So, but look, we brought change once, and now's not the time to give up. Okay, that's my advice, because I actually see things happening, and I'll tell you where my hope lies. My hope lies in the youth. I don't know if you know about the parliament, digital parliament, that a whole group of youngsters have set up. They've managed to find 222 people out of many, many applications. I think there were thousands of applications interested in taking part. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that the youth are no pushover, okay? And when we get them voting at 18, and this is where we need to actually get them interested and involved, that's where change happens. And for me, the world is changing. A lot of people are rejecting the current politics. A lot of people are disengaging, actually, from this political scenario that relies on, on race, and they use religion, and that relies on a toxic form of politics. A lot of people don't like it. And the one thing I've learned is this: we ought to have strengthened our institutions more than we did. That's the other Pakatan Harapan issue I'm concerned about. They started well with Parliament, with the judiciary. These institutions are so important. But I've also learned one thing, and this is my lesson from America, I suppose, looking at the president that they have. I would say that however strong your institutions are, you still need leaders who act in good faith. Because if leaders don't act in good faith and they lack integrity, they will find ways around whatever system you have. You can still curtail them to some extent, but they can still cause a lot of problems. So at the end of the day, the thing we need to do is to build up the leadership. So I would say to everyone, don't give up on Malaysia. We've got so much to offer in Malaysia. It's a hiccup, okay? What's going on is a hiccup. Once you start looking at it in the bigger context and you start realizing change doesn't come that quickly. By the way, it took Bersih 10 years, okay, as one of the participants in the process of change. And there were many participants in the process of change. 10 years. Because if you remember the elections in 2008, that was the first time Barisan lost their 2/3 majority. And that's when it started, change started. And my own view is, look, the genie is out of the bottle, as far as I'm concerned. It is going to be very hard after nearly 2 years of Pakatan Harapan and after our total investment of the people in the process. It's going to be very hard for them to expect us to accept going back to what it was we fought against. It's going to be difficult. They're trying, though, by the way, very hard by using the Sedition Act and trying to use intimidation tactics and so on and so forth. But you find that you are not winning the hearts and minds of the people, because that ultimately is what's going to do it. What's going to do it is winning the hearts and minds of the people. But look, we're a very complex society, okay? We're not like any other society. We have several challenges. There are many layers in Malaysia that you have to get past. But as I say, my hope lies in the youth. So I really would not like to see them give up. People like me can give up, okay? The youth, because this is for yours, for the taking, okay? This is yours, and you can make it happen, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I think that's the final question for me for now. I'll pass on to Mr. Disney.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Sue. That was really interesting. I was a very interested observer over all of this. Very interested in what you said about Bersih, and of course, you can even go back 20 years before that, can't you, to the late 80s, and there was a lot of political ferment. But when you mentioned your sort of disappointment, which I think a lot of people share with what happened with Pakatan in their less than 2 years. Why couldn't these changes be done? I mean, a lot of them were in the manifesto. Everybody was calling for institutional reform, parliamentary committees to be opened up, judicial reforms, which I get, So why, given they had a decent majority, did it not happen? Is it just Dr. M and the Bersatu guys, or is there some other factor that I'm missing?
Well, actually, there are a lot of factors. I think, if you remember the iSurge rally, for example, let's just take that as an example. Now, that was something that was in the manifesto. It should have been very easy to push through. But the minute CAS and UMNO, and by the way, they're very quiet now when they're in government, but when they're outside government, they were making life miserable for PH. But PH should have expected that. And PH's problem, in my view, was they never explained these things to the people. You need to get buy-in. If you look at the way Syed Saddiq, for example, pushed through the Undi 18 constitutional amendment, he did it by reaching across the aisle, by having dialogues, by explaining, etc., etc. When you suddenly come up with something without actually explaining it to the people, then that's where you run into problems. And I think that was one of the issues. There was always pushback from UMNO and CAS, and they were very noisy about it. They'd have rallies and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But you needed leadership to deal with that. And I think if Pakatan Harapan had just soldiered on and explained it properly to everyone, whatever changes they wanted to bring, then it could have happened.
Yeah. No, I agree. I was quite surprised. I mean, the Rome Treaty. I mean, there were so many, but these are factions within UMNO, aren't they? We're talking about the ultra right wing, and a lot of those demos were, I think, demonstrably rent a mob, weren't they? These were people shipped in who probably didn't really know what the issues were. So I mean, it kind of ties into this whole issue of, you talk about Malaysia being very complex and having to peel back the layers. I don't know too many people who are willing to really peel back the layers, because we're slightly fearful of what we might find. Can I just bring you up to the current situation? I mean, a lot of us who follow politics, I think, have got slightly confused about the delicate constitutional situation that we all find out that Malaysia finds itself in right now. Could you just give us, from a, speaking to laymen, what are the constitutional issues taking place right now as far as the new government and the old government and numbers and the monarchy and so forth and so on? Okay,
look, a lot of people think this is a constitutional crisis. I don't think this is a constitutional crisis. It's a crisis of democracy. And here's the thing. Because it is this is about coalition politics. So what this so-called PN government, or what this PN government did, was to switch allegiances and alliances and create a new coalition. Strictly speaking, legally speaking, there's nothing wrong with that. But morally speaking, of course, that's another issue altogether. So what they have done, as I say, doesn't really constitute a constitutional crisis. And I know a lot of people feel that way, because we feel our whole world has, the bottom has fallen out of our world, as it were, because of what happened. But I'm afraid it's about pure politics. It's about numbers. It's about who has the numbers to form government. And that's all it is. And I can tell you, it's a very uneasy situation, because neither side, and I'm talking about the opposition and the PN government, have clear majorities. So we could be heading for a constitutional crisis, a hung parliament, or whatever it is we want to call it. We could be headed there. And we could be headed towards a dissolution. If there is a motion of no confidence in Parliament in July, and it succeeds, then the Prime Minister will go and ask for a dissolution. He will have no choice. So I think these are the constitutional issues that may happen. But as far as the change is concerned, it's just coalition politics. And of course, as I say, not legally wrong, but morally is another question altogether.
Are you in favour of anti-hopping, anti-couldnt laws? Do you feel that they are justified? I know there are strong arguments on both sides. Where do you fall on that issue?
Well, you know, I wouldn't have wanted it earlier, but now I think because of the way things are going, there must be some provisions that do discourage hopping. For example, if I'm not mistaken, in the UK, you can have recall elections if something like that happens, if people leave the parties, etc. So that kind of option, to me, is good. Because, look, there must be some discipline, really. Because what they have done, the PN government, is they have made a lot of people feel that our votes really don't matter. I don't know why we went to the polls. Why did we go to the polls? Yeah. Why did we champion for, you know, this coalition when it just fell apart? So I think there are measures that can be taken to stop this sort of anti-hopping, to stop this sort of hopping, actually.
Yeah.
So because you know, Mark, it's still going on. It hasn't stopped. It's not going to stop.
I mean, the problem is when you talk about moral positions, you know, we all hope that PH would be more moral than UMNO, which I think everybody understands what UMNO is. But, you know, I mean, Bersatu were full of frogs. After the election, Dr. M brought in a lot more. And that seemed to tip the balance. You know, so it almost seemed to me that when that happened, the reformist zeal of some of the PKR guys and the DAP guys just kind of went because they felt that nothing was actually going to get through because these guys almost had a veto, I think, on a lot of these issues. I don't know. When it comes to the leadership, I mean, you've been on record as supporting, I think, different people. Who do you currently side with in the whole PH power struggle?
Oh, I'm out of it. Sorry, because you know what I think is going on? I actually am not interested in what they're doing. I'm not interested that they're fighting. I'm not interested in why they're doing what they're doing. Because as far as I'm concerned, they ought to get on with it, make a decision, and move. Because honestly, why are we involved in this whole bitter argument about why it should be X and not Y and Z? I mean, for goodness sakes, can you now understand why they fell apart? Because if they cannot resolve the most important issue confronting them, then what are they there for? You know, and I'm sorry, a lot of them are my friends. But I can tell you one thing, I've disengaged from this whole process of who should be the Prime Minister in PH. And by the way, I hope they have the numbers, right? The way they're talking as if, you know, the numbers are there. Well, I'm not sure about that. So honestly, this is like a bitter divorce, okay, that nobody wants to know about. It's what they should be doing behind closed doors. They need to figure it out and come back to us quickly, because otherwise, what, you know, does it mean they can run this country again if they cannot resolve this? Yeah. So to be honest, my view is a lot of people have disengaged. I'm not interested in their quarrels, to be honest.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, go on.
Yeah, no, I've got to say, I agree with that. It seems to me people I know are far less engaged than they were maybe even a year ago, let alone 2 or 3 years ago. It's almost as if people are throwing up their hands, which is back to what Sue was saying a bit earlier. Of course, we all hope that the kids come back. You know, we all want these kids to come back. And hopefully, you know, but this has happened. This has happened in every generation in Malaysia. I mean, when you came back in the 80s, it was full of vim and vigor. Those that came back in 1970, same thing. But the system somehow defeats people, even with the best intentions. Can I just ask you about, I'll just ask one more question, then Sue, I'm going to pass back to you. It was, since you were getting rather animated there about the PH power struggles, and I think a lot of us sympathize with you. What do you think is going to happen with 1MDB? I mean, from a legal perspective, a lot of us are very worried that it seems that certain individuals are already either taking plea bargains or whatever. What's going to happen in the end? Are these guys going to do jail time or not?
I really don't know. But I have faith in the judiciary. I mean, the trials are going on as far as I can see. Then nobody's backing off. The incidents you are talking about happened before it actually got to trial. Before some of these things actually went to trial. So there, the Attorney General's chambers is involved. So yes, of course, a lot of things change the minute the government changed. There's no two ways about it. Nobody's blind. We can see what's going on. A lot of things, okay, that we fought against, and which is what I cannot believe. Some of these people who were in PN stood next to us in Bersih, fighting for the same things. And right now, they are supporting exactly what we fought against. So that's why I say to you, at the end of the day, leadership must have good faith, right? So what's going to happen with all these cases? I can only hope the judiciary is left alone to do its job, which they will. But some of these things are happening even before the cases get to court. That's the worry that I have.
Were you sorry to see Tommy Thomas go? I mean, I think a lot of people were. I think.
Yes, I think so. But understandable. I think he would have been sacked if he hadn't resigned. So, yeah, at the rate they're sacking everybody. I mean, look, how many? And I tell you what they've done. They've removed so many women. So the women are really feeling mad. If you thought you're winning hearts and minds, you're not when you do that. So that is, to me, is a not acceptable move, unacceptable move, totally. And also this whole idea that politicians should sit on GLCs. Are they crazy? I mean, that is completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. So let me tell you, my wish for the future is that we get a third force, okay? So in other words, and this is where I say the youth must come in and demand a different kind of politics. You've got to say that this politics is not acceptable in this day and age anymore. It has to be a rising third force. Of course, not to take over the government. I don't know that we have enough people. New people to come in, new blood to come in and to run for elections and slowly change the mindsets of the people. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, me too. Sue, I'm going to talking about smart young people. I'm going to pass over to you.
You're going to make me blush, Mr.
I should ask Sue as a youth, member of the youth. Now, what are your plans for the country?
Exactly. Yeah.
I always tell all my we all, interestingly enough, a topic of conversation that is frequently discussed in Cambridge, especially in the Malaysian society, is whether or not we should come home and Malaysian politics. I remember when the Sheraton move happened early on this year, we were all sort of distraught because we felt as though we had been betrayed, much like many of the people who are back home in Malaysia. And there's just really a sense that they don't care. Like, the people have no say almost. Like, no matter what you do, it will be overridden by someone up there. And it's quite a disappointing feeling to sort of come to terms with, I guess. I would like to actually talk to you more about the women's ministry right now in Malaysia. So early on during the MCO, they were criticized not just in Malaysia but worldwide for their campaign that women should speak like Doraemon, the cartoon character, instead of nagging their husbands. And more recently, Hannah Yeoh has been charged, right, because had to make a statement at Bukit Aman and all that, because she asked what happened to her roadmap for combating child marriage. So I guess since earlier on we talked about how it is the cultural inequality between genders that needs to be sort of tackled in Malaysia, not the legal formal equality anymore. Do you think that the current women's ministry will be able to tackle this cultural inequality, or are we just going to take a step back completely and sort of erase all the work we put into it? Because if you remember, in 2018, there was such massive outrage and just complete shock that child marriage was still not just a thing in Malaysia, but so widespread as well, so widespread all across the country. And it is something that's so backwards, and I just feel very helpless, and I don't know whether I should just trust that the people in power are going to do what they're going to do anything helpful to combat this. It is really quite a difficult thing to talk about, because every time I talk about it, it's such an emotional thing. I have a brother who is who is about 12 years old, and who is the age of like a lot of these child brides, and it's insane to me that this is still allowed in our country, Malaysia. So yeah, how do you think the women's ministry is going to tackle all these problems about gender and child marriages?
Oh, with due respect, I don't think they can. Sorry. With due respect, I was already fighting with the last, previous ministers. Look, child marriage was something that PH also should have done, right? And actually, to the credit of some of the rules in certain states, they have actually come out against it. But look, here's the thing. In urban Malaysia, these things seem so utterly obvious to us, okay? But there is a lack of understanding on our part, and I think I suffer from that too, of the cultural heritage and background and the way in which people have been brought up and educated in other parts of the country, okay? Which isn't to say it's right. But what I'm saying is this: above and beyond everything else that we do, we need to change the education system, because the thought processes, all right, that keep people believing that child marriage is okay in many, many communities, and I can tell you it's tied up with race and religion. All of that there has to be a relearning on that front. And I personally think our education system has completely failed our children. Completely. So we need to reach out. For me, sitting back in our air-conditioned rooms and criticizing is not going to change things. We really need to reach out, and we need to educate people. Of course, one assumes ministers are educated, but I'm afraid we can't make that assumption necessarily anymore. I mean, educated, when I say educated, I mean in these matters. One wishes that all our MPs have actually read the federal constitution. One wishes our MPs would read their papers before they go into parliament and vote for a bill. One wishes that they would read enough to question what's happening. But that is our problem. Our problem is education. So I'm afraid there is a lot of work to be done. Whether it will be done under this government or not is another thing. But it is also an understanding of what's going on in the rest of the country that is necessary. And sometimes you have to reach out. It's like class, reaching out to class and having honest dialogues with them on some of these issues. Because if we're just gonna, you know what I'm trying to say? If we're just going to criticize, of course, criticize ministers, criticize MPs, yes, because they should know what they're talking about. But when you need to change mindsets as well, is the point I'm trying to make. So don't despair. It's happening all over the world, some of these things. I mean, look at the racism that goes on. It's shocking in this day and age, but it's going on around the world. So how do you change that? You change that by changing mindsets. And I think there is a lot of work to be done here, without a doubt. But again, there you are. Child marriage to me is about saving children. And I cannot understand as well, just like you can't, why that isn't a priority,
Okay, yeah. I agree with a lot of what you said. Thank you so much for your answer. We've just had a question come in from Faisal Arif. So if there is to be a snap election scenario, and if it came down to choosing between a corrupt but functioning government or a clean but paralyzed government, which one do you think the Rakyat would choose? And I guess why?
Okay, I don't know what the Rakyat would choose, but I would choose clean, always, and twice on a Sunday, always. Because corruption is a cancer. Corruption is destroying this country, was destroying this country, will continue to destroy this country if we allow it to carry on. A corrupt government may look like it is, and I'm talking in general terms, okay? A government who allows corruption may look as if it's functioning, but the breakdown, the undermining, the breakdown, the rotting of the system will eventually make it non-functioning. So what I would like to see is a clean government. And anyway, why shouldn't we ask for a clean government? And I'm not sure, paralyzed, whether whether they're talking about PH, but I don't know necessarily that a clean government is paralyzed. But I'll tell you one thing. A clean government will face a lot of resistance from all those who are guilty of corruption. And it means they've got to find the guts to do the right thing. They've got to. Hong Kong did it. Hong Kong eradicated corruption over a period of 5 or 6 years. It takes time. You need buy-in you need political will, and you need buy-in from the people. But the problem is, for the two parties right now, everything is about winning elections. And this is my favorite quote, okay? The difference between a statesman and a politician, okay? Statesman thinks about the next generation, a politician just thinks about the next election. That's the difference. And unfortunately, right now, all they do is think about how they're going to win the next election. And that's why they're not making long-term decisions that are good for the country.
Yeah.
And I think really, they're stuck with that.
I mean, Malaysia's not the only one, is it? I mean, this is exactly what's happening. The criticism of Trump is precisely that. Everything is calculated on short-term gains, as you perhaps might expect. So, yeah. Sorry, Sue, were you going to? I was going to ask.
Oh no, go ahead.
Another political question, but no, you carry on. Go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions that came in towards the end there. Back to kind of some of the legal issues, where it says a lot of people are not terribly impressed in Malaysia right now, to put it mildly, with recent headlines. I think you've detailed a number of them already. Court decisions, political actions, policing, on social media and so on. I was quite surprised to see that the number of people who are being charged, for example, under the Multimedia Communications Act, right? And that was under, Gobin's ministry before. I'm amazed that those kinds of things were left. And what always puzzled me is with the two things, if you just clear them up. One is how easy it is to make police reports in Malaysia. I mean, is that normal anywhere else, where you could just make a police report and the police will investigate? And when you look at the Multimedia Communication Act, I can't remember, was it 236? I can't remember which section, right? And amongst sort of harass, intimidate, and so on, you've got a word like annoy. Now, it just seems bizarre to me that you would have a word like annoy. It so much annoys me that I see online and hear people say, am I allowed to make police reports on anything that annoys me? Could you just clarify that for me?
Sure. Well, we can get into the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of police reports that are made in this country, okay? Mm-hmm. And by the way, have you noticed, police report is not just one person going and lodging a report. Mm-hmm. You get a whole team of people, and then you have photographs taken, and then you call the press, and you're making a police report. It's as if you have just spoken the truth, okay? Yeah. So it is a most abused right. And my own view is the police should actually go after those who lodge false reports. It's got to stop.
Exactly.
But there you are. Nonsense. They make nonsense of police reports. And then again, you have police reports where only some are investigated and some are not. The multimedia, I think the 233 is the section we were talking about. Harass, annoy, etc. Look, we've been fighting provisions like that for the longest time. I think Evidence Act 104A and so on and so forth, because actually it is undermining freedom of speech. Now, under the federal constitution, you can have legislation, okay, that impinges on your freedom of speech, provided your conduct leads to a breach of peace. Then that's fair enough. If that is how broadly it is, but annoy and all that doesn't cause a breach of the peace.
Yeah.
So for me, these provisions and the fact that this new government, and let me tell you, they've come in during a time of the MCO, and for some reason they feel that they're immune from criticism because of that. Well, they're not. They're accountable every minute that they are in power. And the other thing is this, that I'm surprised at the number of charges they're bringing against people. I mean, we are fighting the coronavirus. We're all masked and trying to stay healthy and distanced and so on. And they're calling people up to give police statements into the police station. Now, where are our priorities?
Yeah.
What are they doing? And I think it is a sign of a government who is not secure. Governments who are secure don't necessarily do this. Okay, I say necessarily. They have done it in the past when they had huge majority. I don't say no. But so that's one of the things. And so I actually think that we're going the wrong way on all these things. Very much the wrong way.
I was very surprised that because obviously you see comments. I read the English press, but I'm not sure what it would be like in the other languages. But there are some pretty harsh things get said by commentators in Malaysia Kini, Malaysian Insider, and so on. But now it seems that those publishers are going to be held liable for comments made by their commentators. Stuff over which they have no control. I mean, again, the same thing was happening with the Twitter issue and Trump, right? Introducing legislation to make it easier to sue online portals. That surely is going to do tremendous damage to freedom of speech.
It is indeed, I think. I mean, the particular case that you're talking about, Malaysia Kini being called up for contempt. Contempt is a very, very serious form of action. And it is in respect of comments made by readers. And I think a couple of the comments were pretty bad. I'm not saying no, but Malaysia Kini itself shouldn't be facing this contempt proceeding. So it's creating a chilling effect on the people, on people who are already scared and worried about our future because of the economy they're facing, who are worried about the virus, who are worried about so many things. You add this on top, it has a chilling effect. That is what they want. And when they control the media, they control the narrative.
Exactly.
It's important to control the narrative, and that's why they do this. So in that sense, we missee it because although it was happening during their time as well, but not as bad as this.
Right. Sue, we've got about 5-6 minutes left. I'm going to pass over to you now. Would you like to ask Ambiga something else? Yeah.
So I have a few points on questions. So the first one would be, I guess a lot of people are actually quite happy with how PN is currently dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. And although you did say, that does not of course, that does not absolve them of the things that they have done. And they should be held accountable for all the things they have and will do. But it seems as though because of COVID has almost given them an advantage in that it's sort of distracted everyone momentarily. And it looks as though they're dealing with it very well. If a snap election was called, do you not think that having experienced this whole COVID scenario, they would be advantaged? Like they would have sort of advantage in that they can be like, okay, look at our term in power. We've done a good job. We managed to reduce Malaysia's cases and we managed to control. Our recovery rate is one of the highest in the world. Do you not think they would use that credit to their advantage? And is there a counter to it? Because at the end of the day, your health is important. Health of the nation is quite important.
No, I think they have done a good job because you know why? Because they left it to the professionals. Okay, so credit to them for that. And I do think they have an advantage if there is a snap election on that score. There are many other advantages which I won't go into. But if at all PH is going to counter this, if at all they get their act together now, by the way, Then I think, though, PH has to start by doing some serious self-examination into why this happened. Because everybody is blaming, of course, all those who, who crossed over. But what about PH itself? How did they allow this to happen? They need to fix a lot of things. And they need to show, I mean, if there's a snap election, I'm hoping they'll have time to do that. I don't know. They really need to show that they are the persons or statesmen that they promised to be. And I don't know whether that's going to make a difference. I really cannot read. But as I understand it, the advantage is to PN on because of the way the handling of the crisis. Yes, the advantage is to them.
Okay.
I mean, my understanding of the 18 vote is that hasn't actually gone through Parliament yet, has it? I mean, or it hasn't actually finally gone through, so it might not actually be gazetted until, well, maybe after, will it?
No, next June or July, yeah.
In time for.
Yes. So if it happens then you will have the 18-year-olds voting. So I suspect that's one of the reasons. If they hold an election, that's one of the reasons we're doing it. They're doing it. All right. Yeah. But let me tell you, it would be, in my view, hugely irresponsible to have an election right now. When the country is facing the crisis, economic crisis, and all other crises that we're facing right now, it would be completely irresponsible of the government to hold a snap election, which is going to cost us a lot of money, and force people to go out and vote. And I think, I'm not sure that will go down very well. So for me, that's something they need to weigh.
Yeah, agree.
We've just had a couple of questions come in, so if you could quickly answer them. The first one is from Balaraj Panu. He asks, his question to you is it fair to say that laws in Malaysia are widely drafted with catch-all provisions, but with selective prosecution?
Well, I don't know which. I suppose you're talking about things like the Sedition Act and so on. I mean, frankly, the Sedition Act should have been done away with. It's a piece of legislation that shouldn't be on our books at all. Yes, whichever way it's drafted, okay. And I think, yes, you're right. It makes things always easier for the prosecution. But selective prosecution definitely goes on in this country. They pick and choose who they want to go after and who they want to let off. No doubt about that. And that's one of our complaints that we've always had, actually, in relation to that.
Okay. The second question that's come in is from Faisal Arif again. So he asked, his question to you is, if large majorities in parliament is a thing of the past in Malaysia, will that make it harder for us to formulate long-term policies projects that take longer than 5 years to execute?
Well, if everyone just keeps thinking of the next election, as I've always said, yeah, it will be very difficult. But sometimes you've got to have people in there who don't care about the next election and who are going to set proper policy decisions. We need a reset, frankly, on many of our archaic old practices that has not really, progressed the country as much as it could have. And so for me, and let me tell you, one of the things that I'm sad to see is that in this crisis situation that we're in, the parties are unable to reach across the aisle and work together. I mean, whatever it is, they can carry on fighting with each other on other things. But on many issues, they could have worked together, and they haven't. And the PN government hasn't reached out to the opposition for that. So we are too set in our ways. We still do things the old ways. And there isn't somebody there who says, hey, don't the people matter? Can we get together and do something that will alleviate the suffering of the people? And now another hobby horse of mine, by the way, is what we've done to the refugee community and the migrant community. How dare we? How dare we? And then we talk as if, I remember when it was the Rohingya issue, PAS and UMNO, and I remember they went on a boat or something to deliver. They were silent when they saw what was happening to them. I mean, what has happened to humanity in this country, And I'm talking about everyone. The kind of racist comments I see coming from all races really worries me, all right? That we've really learned nothing, honestly. So we have a long way to go in knowing how to treat human beings. And I think that's probably one of the first lessons we've got to learn when we go back to school, when we get our school education system going. That's one of the first things we're going to have to deal with.
Absolutely.
I think last question for me is so I guess a lot of young people like me are very upset by how the refugees in Malaysia are being treated. We're very upset about many things. So first of all, we're upset about the refugees, how they're being treated, because people are people, humans are humans. There really isn't that much of a difference when it comes down to the basis of it. Second thing we're mad about about gender inequality in Malaysia. And third thing we're mad about five things, I think. So refugees, gender inequality, racism, education disparity, and just the fact that our government does not see people as people. And I guess for everyone, so far, what a lot of people I know have been doing is that we've been posting helpful information on social media, and we've been just educating ourselves by watching documentaries or reading articles about what's going on, and trying to talk to our friends about this, trying to talk about having uncomfortable but important conversations with our family about internalized racism and why that's a bad thing. But what else can we do? What do you think young people, well, not just young people, but the people of Malaysia, what can the rakyat do to sort of propel ourselves forward and sort of advance our country? Because obviously all these problems, they're there, but they can go away if we just put our minds to it. So what is it that we need to do? And how can we help?
Well, as I suggested, you should all start a third force. Okay, look, you guys are better than all of us put together on social media, and it is a powerful tool. Look at what we're doing now. All right, we're having a virtual, and so many people are probably listening in. Well, I hope so many people are listening in. So you've got the means to reach out. You've got a really powerful tool here. So my suggestion is set a new narrative. Okay? Now, that's still a little bit naive, let me tell you, because you also need to reach out, not to the urbanites, people outside, you know, and you need to get them onto the computer and have these serious conversations. You can do it. If anyone, that's why my hope lies in the youth, frankly, because you know how to do this, all right? You know the means. That's why you have the digital parliament idea, which is a brilliant idea. Now, can you imagine what you can do when you can reach out to people in Sabah, Sarawak, people outside the cities and towns? Set a new narrative. Tell this government, okay, you are not happy with the kind of politics that they're practicing, and this is what you want. I think that is a really important move.
Be loud
That's
enough.
what I would suggest.
Yeah. Be loud enough so they cannot ignore you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it does sound all doom and gloom, but when you look at Malaysia's response, and it's not just, you know, it's not the government, right? It's the people. How incredibly responsible people were, how people rallied round. There's loads of real positives, I think, have come out of this. You're going to see a huge jump in students' ability to access and learn from online sources. There's going to be a huge number of positives with such a tiny, almost insignificant death toll in Malaysia, 121. I mean, it's nearly 60,000 dead in the UK, with double the population and 20 times the death. So, you know, Malaysia is kind of coming out of this in some ways positively. And again, I'm sure Sue would agree. I mean, you know, of course, we live in this KL bubble, Klang Valley bubble. But I honestly don't really see the racism in the people. I mean, the problem is that we have racist systems and racist politics. Malaysians, when I speak to Malaysians, I really don't get a sense of nasty. I mean, there's a certain level of racism that's normal in this country. You kind of factor it in to conversations, right? Which is different, I think, from the West, which now has the zero tolerance, Black Lives Matter narrative. Malaysians factor it in and kind of get on. I mean, I don't think, I think what you were just saying is achievable. I think the people are receptive to these kinds of things, but we've got to kind of slow down on the religion and politics. Otherwise, there's no stopping it, right? I don't think there is a single example, is there, of a wholly Islamicized country that would be even in the top 60, 70% of global development. So we don't want to be dropping down there. We need to be moving back. I think Emma is about to come back in. I'll just say thanks a lot, Sue. Really nice to hear you. And Dato Ambiga, really many thanks for joining us. I'm going to hand back to Emma.
Yeah, thank you for that fascinating discussion. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed your honesty and your frankness and refreshing. It felt like you were proverbially banging heads together there, which is probably just what's needed. Fantastic. Yes. And let's hope that you have inspired the next generation, this third force. So watch this space, and hopefully all the Kumas guys out there, I'm sure, will be watching the replays of this, and OUMC, not forgetting the Oxford, young Oxford people as well. Yeah, fascinating and inspiring, and just such sense and clarity, quite frankly. Also echoed a lot of the things that Dr. Jamila Mahmood said last week. The same thing about the way we treat each other and the way civil society should be. Yeah, the lady's speaking a lot of sense in our Wednesday webinars, quite frankly.
Emma, this was my point the other day, right, to Jamila, to Dr. Jamila, that you need the women to take over in this country. You need 20, 30 women, and just and put them into the cabinet. And honestly,
yeah.
That's the only way, because when you look around Malaysia, the disparity is actually, I mean, I've been in education nearly 30 years and in Malaysia, and the gap between the girls and the boys is quite striking, I've got to say. I mean, and that's always been the case. Well, certainly since the early 90s when I came here. Always there's this big gap, and that gap is even bigger amongst some communities than others. I think everyone knows which one I'm talking about. So we really, I mean, Malay women really need to kind of get a grip and take control. That's what's got to happen in this country.
Yeah, as in your own household, Mr. Disney.
Like in my own house.
Okay, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much to Sean, our tech guy. Thank you to Sue. Thank you to Mr. Disney and Ambiga. Thank you so much for being honoured and delighted and inspired and informed by our discussion. Thank you very much.
Nice to
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.